One of the things that I've been most interested in lately is research on something called mindset. And mindset science says that the way that you think about something can actually transform the effect that it has on you. Some of the most fascinating findings include how you think about aging can actually impact how long you live and how well you age. People who have a more positive attitude toward aging live on average 8 years longer than people who have a more negative attitude towards aging. And they actually thrive more, and they preserve all the things that we think are good about youth and middle age. They actually do better as they get older. And some of this new research on mindset says that the way that you think about stress can actually help shape whether its effects are the toxic effects that we fear, like that stress can make us sick, or that stress can lead to burnout, or whether we experience actually much more positive effects from stress, things like learning and growth and greater engagement with life and with our relationships. If you're anxious and your heart is pounding and you're sweating, if you're able to remember that, okay, well, this anxiety is distracting or distressing, but I also know that that anxiety, that heart pounding, is my body trying to give me energy, that in some way my body and brain are trying to rise to the challenge. Literally just remembering that 5 seconds when you're experiencing anxiety can transform that anxiety into a physiological state that actually gives you more energy, that actually gives you more confidence. So one of the hormones that the body releases during stress is DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone. It's literally strengthening. It helps the immune system. And its effect on the brain is to actually help make the brain more resilient to future stress. It increases neuroplasticity. And this is part of the normal stress response. And when you choose to view stress as an opportunity to learn and grow, your body and brain actually responds, releases more of DHEA, and actually puts you in a biological state that makes it more likely that you will learn and grow from that stressful experience.
Psychologists told us a lot about misery and suffering and drug addiction and schizophrenia, but there's a way in which that's just half-baked. I mean, a full-baked, what we want to know is what makes life worth living. How about positive emotion? How about meaning? How about spirituality? How about gratitude? How about accomplishment? So the intellectual idea was for psychology to have make full sense of the human condition. In many circumstances, the data are that optimistic people get depressed at only half the rate when setbacks occur, that optimistic people do better than expected on the sports field, in grades, and in many kinds of work, that optimistic people have yeastier immune systems, they're less likely to die of cardiovascular disease, and that descriptively optimistic people are generally liked better. It turns out if you take pessimistic people, depressive people, of which I'm an example, and you teach them principles of recognizing the catastrophic thoughts they're saying to themselves, this interview is going terribly, I've really lost my touch, and then arguing against it, no, you know, Joe's been laughing and smiling at my jokes throughout, then it turns out you can make people permanently, lastingly more optimistic. The last evolutionary epoch was the Ice Ages, and the mentality that said, you know, it's a lovely day in Philadelphia today, it'll probably be a lovely day tomorrow, got crushed by the ice. And the mentality that was a catastrophe, looks like a lovely day in Philadelphia today, but this is just superficial, and what's really coming in catastrophe is what our intellectual evolutionary forebears, the ones that survived, gave us. So we're bad weather animals, ready to see the most catastrophic.
Now, here are 5 of my favorites. I have a list of about 20. The first is that contrary to the artistic myth, creative people are creative when they're happy and they're not creative when they're depressed. That's number one. The second has to do with attention, that when people are happier, their peripheral attention is better. When people are sad, their focal attention is better. Third surprising finding, optimistic and cheerful people probably live between 8 and 9.5 years longer than pessimistic people. That's about the equivalent of smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. A fourth finding is that wealth doesn't do everything that you think it might. That the relationship between wealth and life satisfaction is powerfully curvilinear. That means once you're beyond the safety net, if you're thinking about giving up 5 weekends next year to make an extra $20,000, and what you care about is how happy you're going to be next year, you probably shouldn't do it. You will get more happiness out of spending 5 weekends with your family and friends than you will out of an extra $10,000. And a final finding worth mentioning, if you're interested in who's going to win a presidential election in the United States, bet on the optimist.
So check this out. Carol Dweck and her colleagues wanted to look into the impacts that praise had on children's development. So what they did is they took over 400 fifth grade students from all across the nation, and they did a really simple yet interesting study. Here's how it went down. They gave all the kids a really easy non-verbal IQ test. There were 10 questions, and at the end of the test they praised all the children in one of two ways. The first group was praised for their intelligence. So they said, "Wow, great job, you must be really smart at this." Now the second group was praised for their effort. So they said, "Wow, great job, you must have worked really hard at this." Now this is a really subtle difference, but the impact it had is incredible. So after praising the kids and getting them divided up into the two groups, they gave them all an option for their next test. The first option was, hey, this next test is going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be a great opportunity to learn and grow. Now the second option was, this next test will be similar to the first and you will surely do well on it. Now the interesting thing is, out of the group that was praised for their intelligence, 67% of them chose the easier option, while 92% of the kids who were praised for their effort chose the harder test. This is unbelievable to think about, how just the subtle difference in the way that they were praised had such an impact. Carol Dweck explains why this happens.
The child or adult hears, "Oh, you think I'm brilliant and talented. That's why you admire me. That's why you value me. I better not do anything that will disprove this evaluation." As a result, they enter a fixed mindset, they play it safe in the future, and they limit the growth of their talents. Whereas focusing on the strategies they use, the way they're stretching themselves and taking on hard tasks, the intense practice they're doing, those are the kinds of things that say to a child or an older athlete, it's about the process of growth. As a result, they don't feel, "Oh, if I make a mistake, you won't think I'm talented." They think, "Oh, if I don't take on hard things and stick to them, I'm not going to grow."
Next, Dweck and her colleagues gave all the kids a really difficult test. It was one that they would surely fail, but they wanted to look at how the different kids attacked this challenge. Dweck noticed that the group that was praised for effort worked harder, longer, and actually enjoyed this test more than the group that was praised for their intelligence. This group got really frustrated with this test and had the tendency to give up early. After this artificially induced failure round, all of the kids were given a third and final test. Now this test was the same level of difficulty as the first one, but check out the results. The group that was praised for their intelligence actually did worse on this test than the first one. Their average score actually dropped by 20%, while the group that was praised for their effort did significantly better, raising their average score by nearly 30%. This is a 50% difference in performance that was caused by a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. This study shows how praise can either make or break a child's development. I mean, we all do it. We all want to be positive with the children we work with, so teachers, coaches, parents are always looking for ways to support their kids and tend to praise them quite a bit. So we need to look at research like this and realize, okay, praise is a good thing and there's nothing wrong with being positive, but we need to be very careful about praising someone's intelligence or abilities and focus more on the process and the effort that they put forth. I think this is a pretty easy fix that will help us develop growth mindsets within the kids that we work with. And as all the research shows, having a growth mindset has a big time impact on the development of a child, whether it's on the court, in the classroom, or just in life.
But the most exciting thing was the students were now believing and expressing the idea that their potential as Native students is unlimited. I want to end with some striking new findings by Leslie, Simpian, and Meyer. They asked whether mindsets could shed light on gender and minority representation in academic disciplines. So here's the proportion of women getting PhD across what we call STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and maths. And you can see how it declines as you get from biology to maths, engineering, computer science, and physics. What they did was a national survey of scholars in those disciplines to find out from professors and graduate students what brings success in your discipline. Did they believe being a top scholar, let's say in maths, requires a special aptitude that just can't be taught? Or did they believe when it comes to maths, the most important factors for success are motivation and sustained effort? Raw ability is secondary. The more a discipline believed in a fixed mindset, that it was sheer brain power that could not be taught, the fewer women and minorities were in that discipline. Conversely, the more they held a growth mindset, the more there were women and minorities in the discipline. Apparently, women do not see this culture of genius as hospitable or amenable to them. So in summary, growth mindset and growth mindset environments allow students to embrace learning and growth instead of worrying all the time, will they look clever or not? It allows them to understand that effort creates talent, rather than believing if you have talent, you shouldn't need effort. And it allows them to stay resilient in the face of setbacks instead of running from errors. And best of all, it can be taught.
In terms of teaching, one of the hardest questions when you think about the evolution of the human species from the standard framework of evolution, which really is about individual survival, competing, getting your genes to the next generation. One of the hardest questions within that framework is, why are people so frequently and routinely good and generous and sacrificing, right? And you know, most people think that Darwin had this idea of survival of the fittest, that really it's the most ruthless and bloodthirsty who really thrive and survive. That is not Darwin's view of human evolution at all. He really felt that sympathy is the strongest instinct that humans have. Communities that have the most sympathetic members will flourish and raise the greatest number of offspring. That notion of Darwin's led to this sense that out of the vulnerability of our offspring emerged, first of all, social structures like cooperative caregiving, and then also physiological systems shaped by evolution to help us take care of the carriers of our genes, our offspring. We have learned from neuroscience down at UCLA that if you feel physical pain, a part of your brain lights up, and if I see you have that physical pain, the same part of my brain lights up. It's as if we're wired to have the same experience of other people. Empathy is this really complicated task. It really engages the frontal lobes, these newer regions of the cortex that are involved in more complex symbolic processes like language and imagining the future. Because empathy requires that you think there's someone else out there who has feelings and thoughts that may be different from mine. That's a really complicated cognitive achievement. In my lab, the Berkeley Social Interaction Lab, we showed images of prototypical suffering to our participants. They trigger massively powerful reactions of compassion, and what we found in the brain is that a very old part of the brain called the periaqueductal gray, which is common to mammals when they take care of things, lights up when you feel compassion. So that tells us compassion is really old in the nervous system, as Darwin speculated. My students and I got really interested in social class. What does it do to the human mind? Our lab and other labs are interested in something called the vagus nerve. It's the longest bundle of nerves in the human nervous system. In our research, compassion, the feeling of caring for someone in need, activates the vagus nerve. Lower class individuals, if we show them images of suffering, they have a vagus nerve response. You don't see that in upper class individuals. It literally is a compassion deficit that's produced by lots of wealth. Next set of studies on charity. Who gives? Economic analyses would say, if I have a lot of money, it should be easy to give. If I have $900 in my bank account, giving away money it really matters. You know, it matters what you put in your fridge. And in spite of that, what we find is lower class individuals give more, and this is replicated in studies of philanthropy. You know, one of the things that this science tells us is there is enormous strength in these poorer communities of generosity and empathy that, you know, many people in more privileged circumstances miss. It's strong community. Yeah, you know, 60% of what we do is really about maximizing an individual's personal gratification and desire, just a classic survival of the most competitive. But 40% of the time, we're really doing things for other people. And we sacrifice and we risk exploitation and we still do it. And not only that, but it actually becomes personally fulfilling and inspiring to engage in that work. We find these secondary delights in acting on behalf of others. And I think that it really requires that we have to redefine human self-interest. You know, the great ethical traditions have always been encouraging this. And now we're seeing the science say, yeah, the brain really cares about other people. So there are regions of the frontal lobes that are now being called the empathy network. And those regions of the brain do a lot of things. But one of the things that they do is they kind of help us detect other people's pain. When you damage the empathy networks of your brain, which some people do, they become really impulsive. And you can have people who are really good citizens of the world, right? And if they have this head trauma, and little chunks of the frontal lobes are gone, they'll start swearing suddenly, they start yelling at their kids, they feel disconnected. In the neuroscience literature, they call this acquired sociopathy. Through brain trauma, you become a sociopath. And our lab studies find if you give people a little bit of power, they kind of look like those brain trauma patients, right? So we find, like, if I feel powerful, I flirt inappropriately, I am more likely at work to swear and to act in a rude fashion, I'm more likely to gamble. It makes you impulsive. When you feel powerful, you kind of lose touch with other people. You stop attending carefully to what other people think. In our lab, it's come to be known as the Cookie Monster study. We brought 3 people to the lab. We pointed to one person, we said, you're in charge, right? And so that person kind of felt powerful. And then they had to do this really boring task of, like, write policies for the university. And they're getting kind of bored. We bring a plate of chocolate chip cookies. Everybody takes one cookie. All groups always leave one cookie on the plate because you don't want to be that person that takes the last cookie. So there's that 4th cookie. And we find high power people, they reach out and take it. And then my grad student, Dan Ward at the time, he came to me and he's like, I think people are eating differently when they have power. And lo and behold, our high power person was more likely to eat with their mouth open, lips smacking, crumbs literally like falling onto their sweaters, you know. It's ridiculous. Let's begin with the first, broad generalization in the literature, which is that there are studies showing that positive emotions boost your immune profile. They improve the functioning of your cardiovascular system, so they calm it down. Positive emotions have been shown to counteract kind of the cortisol response and the stress response in the nervous system. There are data showing that having a healthy profile of positive emotions boosts your life expectancy, anywhere from 5 to 7 years in some kind of broad reviews of the literature. And those health benefits of positive emotions, people know them intuitively. They almost feel them in their chest, right? Like, wow, I volunteered giving food to people who were hungry, and I just felt strong, right? I mean, that's really interesting. Or, God, I was with my best friends, and we were laughing hysterically, and I felt robust. Or I was walking out in the woods, and the leaves were so beautiful, and I came home, and I felt like I could do more sit-ups. Or, I mean, it's this really interesting dynamic between positive emotion and health. And so that begs the question of what do positive emotions do to the nervous system, right? And so what we're learning is positive emotions like compassion and kindness activate the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the largest bundle of nerves starting in the mammalian nervous system. It starts in the top of the spinal cord, activates muscles in your throat, activates cardiovascular patterns, regulates digestion and immune system. And so we have 10 or 12 studies showing when I feel kind and am helping someone, my vagus nerve is activated, and the vagus nerve is great for your physical health, right? So that's one way in which positive emotions benefit health. We once thought, when I started doing research on positive emotion 25 years ago, when no one was studying them, right, or 20 years ago, people were like, the positive emotions are byproducts, they don't matter evolutionarily, and it turns out they're fundamental. The more positive emotion and the more good you bring out in others at the top of a ratio, divided by the less harm you do to others, the bigger the score, the higher the gen ratio, the happier you'll be. And so when I started thinking about that, it's like, well, there are really simple things now we know, like practice gratitude once a week. I just got to take a moment, like, wow, I'm grateful that my dad taught me how to not be so serious in life, express appreciation to other people in a really heartfelt way, pat someone on the back and say, that was an amazing job, right? Touch people in the right way, right? We know there's a lot of data showing the power of healing touch down to oxytocin in the nervous system. For me, what's underappreciated is getting out in nature. We have data showing that 1 minute being around beautiful trees changes your view of life, makes you feel kinder, right? Play. Just make sure, especially with kids, teenagers, rough and tumble, make sure there's always foolish stuff going on, give. So there are a lot of really practical things you can do. I've kind of hinted at them. Play and give and be mindful and express gratitude, find beauty and awe that really, really matter enormously. The meaningful life is about being kind to others and really focusing on others. I think once you take delight in the welfare of other people and really are devoted to them, a lot of other things flow out of that, right? That become part of the meaningful life. So then you feel compassionate. Then you suddenly tear up and get goosebumps when other people do noble things because you have this sort of reverence for humanity, right? Suddenly other people's acts of generosity become very poignant, right? Like, my God, that person is so good-natured to do this for me. You see a lot of beauty out in the world. So I think it really stems from this kindness and appreciation of other human beings.